He was the son of William Moore Stack, who was a Fenian who had been jailed in England. So I suppose the Fenian ethos was running through his veins. My great-grandfather was married on a couple of occasions. He had 2 separate families because his first wife died in childbirth. So there was quite a big family there. And his second wife had died at a particular stage, not too long after he getting out of prison in England. So I think that the rearing of the family was all about educating them both politically and scholastically. 3 of the family were apprenticed, the boys, as solicitors' clerks, which William Moore Stack had been himself. So that became sort of an important thing.
Austin's father, William Moore Stack, was a leading Fenian and friend of young islander Charles J. Kickham. Part of Edmund Power's active Fenian circle in Dublin, he helped import arms from England. During a search of William Moore Stack's residence in Portland Street, a memorandum was found containing names, and so William Moore Stack was sentenced in 1866, 10th of December, to 10 years penal servitude. He was rearrested in 1879 and held in Dublin for a further 12 months as a suspect. His health ruined, he died before his 60th birthday, leaving Austin responsible for the maintenance of the family. Austin's future experiences were to be an uncanny parallel to those endured by his father.
As far as Austin Stack was concerned, he was very involved in the GAA and the whole organisation of the GAA. Was the captain of the 1903-1904 teams, and he was John Mitchell's player in Tralee. He also served as secretary of the county board of the GAA, and of course the volunteer, the whole training of the volunteers came through the GAA clubs, mostly around the country in general, but in Kerry obviously with the strength of the GAA. Absolutely. The actual training of the volunteers was very much party to the playing of the games as well.
During a visit to Tralee to inspect local volunteers in October 1915, Patrick Pearce first informed Austin Stack of the IRB's plans to land German weapons in Kerry. Stack was to smuggle rifles from Dublin, so the Kerry volunteers would be armed to protect the Germans' shipment. Using the All-Ireland final in November as cover, his lieutenant, Tig Kennedy, and his men went to the house of the O'Rahilly to get the rifles, and they were smuggled aboard the returning GAA supporters train to Tralee. In February 1916, the military council asked Stack to command a mission to unload the German arms and to ensure the weapons were distributed among volunteer units in Munster. Tig Kennedy witness statement. When Stack was giving me his instructions on Thursday evening at the railway station at Tralee, before I boarded the train for Dingle, he stressed to me that headquarters had given specific instructions that we were to be particularly careful that no diversion should be allowed to occur to impede the carrying out of the plan as decided on by them for the rising. He repeated these instructions to me before I left on Thursday evening and instructed me to return with the volunteer contingent to Tralee on Saturday night and to see that no incident would occur on the way to cause such a diversion. He also directed me that I was to carry out my instructions to the letter and that I was to disregard any order issued to me by any other officer other than himself.
Everyone knows the plan was that Casement was coming ahead in a submarine of the Aud, and there were various versions of where the actual arms were to come into, but I think ostensibly at the end of the day they probably would have been coming into Fenit Harbour because that was significant enough a harbour for the size of ship that was coming in.
The timing of the planned operations was not synchronized. The German Admiralty had advised, and John Devoy in New York had agreed, that the Aud would land the arms at Feenit between the 20th and the 23rd of April. This was Pearse's wish. But the Supreme Council of the Irish Volunteers in Dublin revised the plan, deciding that no arms should be landed before the night of Easter Sunday 23rd. Urgent messages were dispatched to Berlin via Count Plunkett and his daughter Philomena. But by the time Philomena got to New York, it was too late to get her clearly worded message to the Aud via Berlin, not to land arms before Easter Sunday night, April 23rd. Her father delivered his message via the German ambassador to Switzerland. The timing was right, but the wording was ambiguous, not to land arms later than dawn of Easter Monday. The Germans saw no reason to deviate from their original plans. Volunteer headquarters in Dublin did not know the Aud had no wireless capacity. Land and sea operations were now on two different time frames. Spindler's instructions were that nocturnal communications would be with the pilot boat and that signalling would be facilitated by the intermittent flashing of two green lanterns. The Germans used a Norwegian ship to avoid detection so they could get close to shore. Witness Statement 516, John J. Quilty, Kappa. The volunteers under Stack and Con Collins were to load the arms on a goods train which was already fixed up to do the job by Joe McGee, station master in Abbeyfield, an old Limerick volunteer. The train was in readiness to transport the rifles from Tralee to near Limerick. The Limerick volunteers marching from Killonan on Easter Monday would pick them up, arm the volunteers in Limerick City and County, hand the residue to the Barretts and Brennans in Clare, and the rest would go to Mellows in Galway. A series of mishaps occurred, beginning with Quilty's Briscoe tumbling in the dark into the water at Ballykissane on Good Friday, April 21st, drowning the men. The men travelling to meet the ship suffered a tragic accident, having driven off the road in the dark.
But everything went pretty haywire out there. The lack of communication, radio signalling, etc., meant that Casement came into Bannistrand with his two assistants, one of whom was probably a British agent. At that stage, the feeling in Kerry would have been that the British know all about it. The little rowboat that landed there, etc., the boys got quite a wetting. They went about a mile up from the beach into an area which is now known as Casement's Fort, and one of them went off looking for help at that particular stage.
Mark Hanna, Witness Statement 1176. Holy Thursday, I noticed activity around the Coast Guard station watching a ship lying off the Maharees Islands at the entrance to Tralee Bay. Good Friday, Casement, Monteith and Bailey landed at Bannistrand in a collapsible boat from a German submarine. Casement walked up to this little fort near McKenna's house. A servant girl, Mary Gorman, noticed him as a stranger. He waited in hiding. Two of the police arrested Casement. Bernard Riley, RIC, Witness Statement. John McCarthy sent his nephew to report a boat floating at the edge of the tide. Sergeant Tom Hearn took a constable with him to the strand at Banna. They found the boat, 3 Mauser pistols, ammunition, signalling lamps and maps. 3 men had been spotted. The people living along the coast were to inform us if they saw any indication of a hostile landing.
Events as they came about after that became a sort of a comedy of errors in a way, in as much as the actual fetching of Casement, the intelligence that was coming back to us in Stack and Tralee led him to believe that he couldn't do a straight run out by Ardfert and onto Casement's Fort, even though he would have known where it was. He took a big long stretch around by Kilmoyley and over to Ballyheigue and came in that road. Again, vehicles were very basic in those times, and by the time he had got there, Casement had already been arrested by the local RIC, and he was on his way to Tralee.
Stack and Con Collins set out from Tralee to pick Casement up, but he was already arrested. Austin Stack and Con Collins were stopped by Sergeant Crowley as they went through Ardfert to Bannistrand. They went to Ballyhaig. Crowley followed and stopped them again. They went along the mouth of the Shannon to the causeway. Police were waiting for them and they were searched again. Out of temper, they made direct for home.
So from that perspective, things had gone wrong there. Information comes from a very good friend in later life, Billy Mullins, who in those days was a very young volunteer, just past his Fianna time, who with another was sent to Dublin after that to take orders by Stack as to whether Casement at that stage should be freed. And he went up on the train that evening and came down the following day, having visited the leadership in Liberty Hall, and was told emphatically that he was not to stir, was not to in any way, physically free Casement, that everything was to be kept nice and quiet. So
Joseph Mellon, witness statement 168. Stack was having a drink in Tom Slattery's and was told a man wanted to speak to him at the barracks. He went and was arrested around 7 p.m. A lot of the people thought it was the intention of the volunteers to rescue Casement. There was no such intention. We knew the rising was to take place on Sunday and did not want to take premature action. Casement, we thought, would still be in Ireland and could be rescued. But he was taken to Dublin by the train leaving Tralee at 11 a.m. Sunday under police escort.
He had got into the station himself, which he was used to doing as a solicitor's clerk, to get documents signed, etc., etc. So he would have had a good relationship with the police that were there. And he found himself surrounded by a special branch that had come down to Kerry, and was arrested himself instead. And that sort of led to a little bit of indecision locally as to what might happen after that. At that point in time, actually, I think the Aud had been arrested in any case and was on its way towards Cork at that particular stage. But of course there was no identification to know, there was no radio signalling to know what actually was happening at that point. So that's really where the whole thing became a little bit upscuttled from the point of view of what was going to happen to the arms when they came in, etc., etc. Volunteers had marched from all over Kerry into Tralee. They were available at a place called the Rink, where the manoeuvres, as they would call them in those days, were taking place. So you had a huge body of men waiting to actually collect the arms. They were to be brought in various vehicles then to various points where they would be collected by volunteers from Limerick, Tipperary, etc., etc. Beyond that, obviously, history played a different part. So the volunteers in Kerry were essentially sent home after a couple of days, and whereas they'd physically marched from places like west of Dingle, etc.
The Aud waited for 24 hours near Feenet. It was then escorted to Cork Harbour by HMS Bluebell, a British naval vessel. On Saturday, the Aud's cargo of guns sank to the ocean floor. The captain had scuttled his vessel off the coastal cove in Cork Harbour. Stack was sent to Spike Island and then court-martialled in Richmond Barracks, where he was sentenced to penal servitude for life.
I think the indecision in regards to what was going on with the politics, if you like, of Owen MacNeill, saying on one hand and advertising the fact that everything was off, all the manoeuvres were off, yet you had volunteers gathering at certain points in various important towns throughout the country. And they were being told on one hand, we are or we aren't. As I said, my father used to use an expression, we weren't sure whether we were being indecisive or not, and this was a classic case of it, because the orders that were not handed out, in effect, were so clouded. And the very fact that the volunteers in Tralee effectively were sent back to their own parishes, that in itself is an indictment to a certain extent of the time, in as much as you had lack of communication, the very fact that orders were changed at the last second.
Una Stack, witness statement 214, Cumann. Austin was blamed by some for not trying to organise a rescue of Sir Roger Casement, and I know he felt very sore about it. But he always said his orders were definite, that no shot should be fired before the start of general hostilities on Easter Sunday, and he knew well that any fracas that might take place in Tralee would frustrate all the plans made for the rising. Austin Stack was an abstentionist Sinn Féin Member of Parliament for Kerry West in the 1918 Westminster election, becoming a member of the first Dáil. He was automatically elected as an abstentionist member of the House of Commons of Southern Ireland and a member of the second Dáil as the Sinn Féin Teachta Dála for Kerry Limerick West at the 1921 elections. He was elected to the third Dáil at the 1922 general election and subsequent elections as an anti-treaty Sinn Féin TD for the Kerry constituency. In the early 1920s, Stack set about establishing arbitration courts on a national scale. His ultimate aim was to establish a legal system that would supplant that of the British administration in Ireland. Between the Anglo-Irish Truce in July 1921 and March 1922, these republican courts functioned with great effectiveness. They were formally abolished in October 1922. He took part in the Civil War and was captured in 1923 and went on hunger strike for 41 days before being released in July 1924.
Where Austin Stack is concerned, I think probably his most the most military type of stuff seems to have been his hunger striking, where he achieved probably the most and really got under the fingernails of the authorities in those times. One famous hunger strike took place in a wing of the Republican wing of Crumlin Road Jail. Obviously they were force fed in those times, but towards the end of it they burnt the whole wing down.
The siege of Belfast Jail began in Crumlin Road on the 22nd of December 1918, when Austin Stack, the prisoners' commander, ordered a newly arrested volunteer, James or John Doran, should be brought by his colleagues to the Republican wing, and not to the criminal section where the authorities wanted to place him. Stack had prepared his ground by storing food, and the prisoners held out in their quarters until an official agreement was reached.
So he was there with the whole leadership. In fact, I have a certificate which I came across through, it was sold in Adams's auctions, going back about 5 years ago, of something that was actually handed to him when he was leaving the prison, being sent over to Strangeways at that stage. They had to get rid of him because he was causing so much turmoil, and a third of the prison had been burnt down at that stage by his actions, if you like. But when he was sent over to, I had this beautiful certificate which is signed by all the key prisoners of the wing at that particular stage, and all hand drawn, but most beautiful kind of Celtic designs and everything on it. But in any case, he finished up with 2 other of that leadership in Strangeways prison, and I think they were only there about 2 or 3 months where they went over the wall and were snuck back to Dublin again. And of course he took a very active role after that in the initial stages of the treaty talks after the ceasefire.
He damaged his leg, I believe, or...
He did, yeah, coming over the wall. Apparently he walked lame ever after, where I think the rope on the far side wasn't quite long enough, and they had to drop the last 12 or 15 feet. So obviously his playing days were over as far as that was concerned. A Liverpool-based policeman put up the 3 lads for about 3 weeks in Liverpool,
right,
before they were put onto a safe ship to bring them back to Dublin. Extraordinary in as much as, you know, that safest house was in a policeman's house.
Yeah.
Apparently they were terrifically well looked after there before they came back to Dublin. And the rest is history. Then he went to the early talks of the treaty talks in London, Downing Street. Didn't like the look of what was being suggested.
Yeah.
And ironically wouldn't go back. You know, there's a lot of sort of criticism as to whether De Valera should have taken place or taken part in them afterwards as well. But there was a sneaking suspicion that what was going to be sold to the then Irish Republic was something short of an Irish Republic.
Austin Stack campaigned against the treaty not only in Ireland, but among Irish American supporters of Sinn Féin in the USA. Stack supported the anti-treaty forces during the Civil War, becoming their Director of Finance.
He lived his latter years. He met Una Cassidy and fell in love with her. She herself was an ex-prisoner who would have been a great friend of Markovich and Maud Gonne, and very much the literary part of the Republican ethos during those years. And they lived on the main coast road in front of Sandymount Strand. I could point out the house to you now if we drove over there. It's only 10 minutes away. But he lived there up to when he passed away in 1929. I think they got married shortly after he was freed, after the Civil War. So they really only enjoyed about 3-4 years together as a married couple.
When Eamon de Valera founded Fianna Fáil in 1926, Stack remained with Sinn Féin, being re-elected to the Dáil at the June 1927 general election. He did not contest the September 1927 general election.
He was in his late 40s at that stage, but had very enduring health problems at that particular period. He bled constantly from his stomach area, and it was during one of the operations to try and correct the bleeding that he eventually died, I think, in the Mater Hospital, if I recall correctly. He's only 49 years of age, but he had aged particularly. I think the latter photographs that I would have of him in his last couple of years when he was over in Sandymount really showed how much he had suffered by way of the hunger strikes in particular. You know, the force feeding, the elongated hunger strikes of the particular period. He, as I said, that seems to be his greatest weapon of his life, that he was able to stand up to that as being his little battle with the British in Ireland over that particular period. The way we were treated as children in school, where we weren't taught our history, is being suggested again by certain politicians today. And that absolutely drives me crazy, because I was reared in a household where freedom of speech at the dinner table or at the lunch table or at the breakfast table was always party to what we did. It had such a sense of purpose in infusing people with a sense of their history and being proud of that history. This sort of review of history that's taking place by certain people. As I refer to it, the brutalise of history. And I say that...
The brutalising.
Yes, I say it in a cynical way, because this rewriting, can one do a Goebbels on history? You know, it's there for everybody to see in its rawest forms, and we must recognise in the humblest way possible that these guys did it for all the right reasons.
He died in a Dublin hospital on 27th of April 1929, age 49. Austin, like his father William Muir Stack, made sacrifices for the cause of Irish freedom. Both men smuggled arms, were sentenced to penal servitude, and died early as a result of their lengthy prison sentences. Tralee has honoured his memory, naming a GAA stadium and the Hurling and Gaelic Football Club in his memory.